I never intended to become known as the Lion Whisperer. That title came later, after the video went viral and media outlets across the world picked up the story. What happened that day on the banks of the Luangwa River wasn't planned, wasn't a stunt, and certainly wasn't something I'd recommend anyone else try. But it changed my life forever. My name is Michael Foster. For the past 12 years, I've worked as a wildlife conservationist and guide at the Mfu Lodge in Zambia's South Luangwa National Park. I've spent thousands of hours observing lions in their natural habitat, documenting their behaviors, and leading tourists on safaris. I thought I understood lions, their territorial nature, their hunting patterns, their social dynamics. I was wrong. It was the height of the rainy season, February 2023. The Luangwa River had swollen beyond its banks, transforming much of the surrounding savanna into temporary wetlands. These seasonal floods are natural and necessary for the ecosystem, but they can create dangerous situations for wildlife. That morning started routinely enough. I was taking water level readings near a section we call Hippo Bend, accompanied by my colleague Joseph Bonder, one of the park's most experienced rangers. We were in a small motorboat, documenting the flood's impact on wildlife movements. "Mike, look there," Joseph said suddenly, pointing toward a commotion about 50 yards ahead. Through my binoculars, I could make out a large animal struggling against the current. "Lion," I said, recognizing the distinctive shape of its head above the water. "Young male, I think." Joseph immediately steered toward it. Lions can swim when necessary, but they generally avoid deep water. This one was clearly in distress, its powerful limbs thrashing against the current, pulling it toward the river's center, where the flow was strongest. "He's gonna drown if we don't do something," I said, already reaching for our rescue equipment. Joseph looked at me skeptically. "Mike, that's a lion, not a person." "It's still alive," I replied. The lion was part of a pride we'd monitored for years, a young male about 3 years old, just entering his prime. Conservationists typically don't intervene in nature's processes, but this wasn't natural. Increased human development upriver had altered the flood patterns, making them more sudden and severe than what the wildlife had evolved to handle. As we drew closer, I could see the lion was nearly exhausted. Its head kept dipping below the surface, emerging with less frequency. There was no time for debate. "Get us alongside him," I instructed Joseph, stripping off my jacket and shoes. "Keep the engine running to counter the current." "You can't be serious," Joseph said, but he maneuvered the boat as directed.
I secured a rescue rope around my waist and handed the other end to Joseph. Before he could object further, I slipped over the side into the muddy water. The river was cold despite the African heat, its current stronger than it appeared from above. I swam toward the struggling lion, keeping my movement steady and non-threatening. The big cat saw me approaching and let out a weak roar, more fear than aggression. "It's okay," I said, in the calm, low voice I'd used around wild animals for years. "I'm going to help you." When I reached the lion, it had nearly stopped struggling, a dangerous sign of exhaustion. Up close, I could see it was even younger than I'd initially thought. Its amber eyes fixed on me with a mixture of fear and what I could only interpret as desperate hope. I positioned myself beside rather than in front of the animal, respecting its space. "Let's get you to shore," I said, gently placing my hands under its body to help it stay afloat. To my amazement, the lion didn't lash out, perhaps too exhausted to fight, or perhaps understanding on some primal level that I represented its only chance at survival. It allowed me to support its weight in the water. Joseph had maneuvered close, but the current made boarding impossible without capsizing. "Aim for the sandbar," he called, pointing to a small island of silt about 30 yards downstream. "The current will help you." I nodded, guiding the lion in that direction, using the river's flow rather than fighting against it. The big cat seemed to understand, its powerful legs beginning to paddle more purposefully as I supported its hindquarters. Those 30 yards felt like miles. The lion was heavy, its waterlogged coat adding to the weight. My arms burned with the effort of keeping us both afloat. Joseph kept pace in the boat, ready to intervene if either of us went under. Finally, my feet touched the silty bottom. The lion sensed ground beneath us and lunged forward, dragging itself onto the temporary island. I followed, collapsing onto my hands and knees in the mud, lungs heaving. For a moment, we both just breathed, man and lion, side by side, on a small patch of earth in the middle of a swollen river. The lion lay on its side, water streaming from its golden coat. I remained a respectful distance away, giving it space while I recovered. Joseph brought the boat alongside. "Mike, come on," he urged, eyeing the lion warily. "You've done what you could. Let's go before it recovers enough to remember it's a predator." I knew he was right. What I'd done was against every safety protocol. Now that the immediate danger had passed, the natural order would reassert itself. A wild lion was unpredictable and potentially lethal. I began backing toward the boat, keeping my eyes on the lion, moving slowly to avoid triggering its predatory instincts. The big cat raised its head, watching me retreat. Our eyes locked, and something passed between us, some wordless communication I still struggled to articulate.
Then, the lion did something that stopped me in my tracks. It rose unsteadily to its feet, shook the water from its coat like an oversized house cat, and took a step toward me. Joseph shouted a warning, already reaching for the tranquilizer rifle, but I held up my hand, signaling him to wait. The lion's body language wasn't aggressive. No lowered head, no flattened ears, no bared teeth. Instead, it moved with what I could only describe as deliberate calm. 3 more steps, and it was directly in front of me, close enough that I could feel the heat of its breath. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to dive for the boat, to put distance between myself and those powerful jaws that could crush my skull with a single bite. Instead, I held my ground, my heart pounding so loudly I was certain the lion could hear it. What happened next would be captured on Joseph's phone camera and would soon astonish millions around the world. The lion raised its right paw and extended it toward me, almost like a person offering a handshake. It hung there in the air between us, this impossible gesture that defied everything I knew about wild animal behavior. Time seemed to suspend as I stared at the outstretched paw, water still dripping from its fur. "Mike," warned Joseph from the boat, his voice tight with tension. But something deep within me, instinct, intuition, madness perhaps, told me this was a moment of profound significance. Slowly, giving the lion every opportunity to withdraw, I extended my own right hand. The lion lowered its massive paw into my palm, its rough pads pressing against my skin, claws mercifully retracted. For 3 heartbeats, we remained connected. Human hand clasping lion paw in what could only be described as a deliberate point of contact. Then, as if satisfied with this exchange, the lion withdrew its paw, gave a slight nod that seemed almost human in its intentionality, and turned away. It walked to the far edge of the sandbar, sat down facing the riverbank, and waited, as if expecting the next stage of its rescue. Joseph was filming now, having recovered enough from his shock to document what was happening. "I've never seen anything like this," he murmured, his earlier fear giving way to awe. "Never in 25 years working with wildlife." "Neither have I admitted, still processing what had just occurred. My hand tingled where the lion had touched it, not from any injury, but from the sheer improbability of the contact.
We had a new problem now. The sandbar was temporary, already shrinking as the river continued to rise. We needed to get the lion to the main shoreline, but our small boat couldn't safely transport both of us and a 400-pound predator. "I'll radio for the larger boat," Joseph suggested. "There's no time," I replied, noticing how the water was already encroaching on our small haven. The current's getting stronger, and he's still exhausted. He might not survive another swim. I made a decision that, in retrospect, was even more foolhardy than my initial rescue attempt. I'm going to guide him to shore. Joseph stared at me as if I'd lost my mind. You're going to what? Look at him, I said, gesturing toward the lion, who remained calmly seated, occasionally glancing back at us. He's not acting like a typical wild lion. Something's different here. I think he knows we're trying to help. Before Joseph could object further, I waded back into the water, positioning myself beside the lion. Come on, I said, using the same calm, encouraging tone. Let's get you home. To my colleague's visible disbelief, the lion stood and followed me into the water. Joseph kept the boat nearby as we began our swim to shore, ready to intervene if the situation changed, but the lion maintained a peaceful demeanor, swimming alongside me with more strength than before, occasionally looking over as if to ensure I was still there. The swim to the main shoreline took nearly 15 minutes, fighting against sections of current that threatened to sweep us downstream. By the time we reached the shallows, I was completely spent, my muscles burning from the extended exertion. Joseph brought the boat to shore a short distance away, approaching cautiously with the tranquilizer rifle in hand. "Mike, move away from it slowly," he directed. "You've done enough. Let's not push our luck." I knew he was right. Whatever unusual connection had formed between the lion and me, it was still a wild predator. I began to back away, expecting the lion to shake itself off and disappear into the bush. Instead, it followed me. "Stop moving," Joseph said, tensely, raising the rifle. I froze, and the lion stopped too, maintaining the same few feet of distance between us. It showed no signs of aggression. Instead, it simply stood there watching me with an intensity that felt almost like communication.
"I think he's injured," I said, noticing for the first time that the lion was favoring its left hind leg. That might be why he was in the river to begin with. Over the next hour, in an unprecedented display of trust, the lion allowed me to examine his infected leg wound. Dr. Leana Muasa, the park's head veterinarian, arrived and treated the injury while the sedated lion slept peacefully. 1 year after the river rescue, I was leading a group of conservation donors on a tour when a familiar form emerged from the tall grass about 50 yards away. Our lion, now fully recovered, his mane fuller and more magnificent than before. He paused, looking directly at our vehicle, at me. "Is that him?" whispered one of the donors, having heard the story. "Yes," I confirmed quietly. The lion held my gaze for a long moment before raising his right paw slightly, not fully extended as before, but lifted just enough to be noticeable, deliberate. Then he turned and melted back into the golden grass of the savanna, a sovereign creature of the wild who had, for one extraordinary moment, reached across the divide between our worlds. Some connections need no explanation or scientific validation. They simply are. Profound moments that remind us that in this vast, complex web of life on Earth, we are all, in our own ways, reaching for understanding and connection across the boundaries that seem to divide us.